All right, welcome everybody to the, I believe, first 100% virtual DIGFM meeting. I'm your host, Steve Romig, coming to you from my couch on the third floor of my townhouse in Campbell, California. Now, for many of you, joining virtually is nothing new, but those amongst us who usually trek down to the Wedge in Santa Clara the second Thursday of every month, I appreciate your understanding and flexibility regarding tonight's meeting. So while I've been at the office all week, many people that I work with have not been, and under the circumstances, it's obviously better to be safe than sorry, right? And so far, I haven't read any reports of the coronavirus traveling across the internet and affecting people while watching a presentation. So I think we're pretty safe for the next couple hours. So tonight, I'm here to talk about the new kid on the block. Perhaps you've heard of it by now. The Claris Connect was launched on March 3rd. This is our new venture for us, and we hope that you're all as excited about it as we are about getting it into your hands. But before we get started, because we're all virtual and some of us aren't in the same room, I'd like to suggest that we put all of us or put everybody on mute during the duration of this presentation, and then either jot down any questions that you have or throw them into the chat. And then at the end of my presentation, we're gonna have plenty of time for questions, but let's kind of hold off interrupting just because I'm not gonna be able to see somebody raising their hand or anything. And for the most part, I'm gonna close off all the GoToMeeting Chrome that I see on my screen so I can just see my laptop in front of me. And I think I've done enough of these presentations over the last few weeks that I have a lot of the questions that usually come up baked into my answers and into my presentation. So I think we'll be okay. So tonight, it's really going to be all about demos. I kind of took out the positioning part of Claris Connect. I think probably all of us have heard that to one degree or another, and I wanted to dedicate as much time as possible to demoing the product because I get the sense that maybe a lot of you haven't been able to see that because our 1-hour webinars or 45-minute webinars only dedicate a small portion of that time to demos. So I'm going to go over some key concepts and terms that'll make working with Claris Connect easier. But then once we get through that, I have a series of demos to walk through, so you'll get a sense of what Claris Connect's all about. Although there are a couple of caveats. Because I want everyone to be able to do what I'm doing tonight, I'm limiting the applications and web services that I interact with to those that are free. So if you played with Claris Connect for any period of time, you know we have about 40 app and web services connectors that we can connect to that come with Claris Connect. And if I don't say so at any time during the presentation, there's absolutely positively more on the way. That's one of the beauties of Claris Connect is you could wake up tomorrow and there could be 5 new connectors waiting for you to use. But I wanted to focus on the ones that are free. So that really limits me in terms of the connectors that I can use. And I made it even harder on myself because I didn't want to use those apps or web services that offer like a 14-day free trial, because then you'll wake up one day and you'll be like, oh, I'm going to demo this to a bunch of people, and you'll realize that your trial ran out. So like I said, I avoided integrating with applications and web services that offered time bomb trials. So with that said, there's only a handful that I can use. And because of that, these may not be the best real world examples out there, and certainly are not going to reflect the complete awesomeness that is Claris Connect. But I'm pretty confident that you'll get the gist of what you can do with Claris Connect, and you'll be excited to try it out if you haven't already. And then the second caveat is I'm using AirPods right now. So we're gonna really test the battery of AirPods. But with that said, I have a backup pair sitting on my desk over here. So if for some reason the audio drops out, hopefully I'll have a heads up that that happens. I'll switch to the other ones and we'll be good. Okay, so we're gonna start with going over some of the terms that are helpful when you're using Claris Connect. But then we're going to start with a simple flow between two apps just to see how easy it is to set up and create one. Then we're going to up the bar a little bit and add in some different components that allow for approvals and conditional branching. And then we're briefly going to talk about what current options you have for integrating with an application or web service that Claris Connect may not have a connector for, or may not directly support. And then we'll wrap things up with a demo of how easy it is to integrate your existing FileMaker data with an external app or web service. All right, so let's jump into these concepts here. So for those of you who don't know, Claris Connect is a cloud-based integration platform that allows you to create entire workflows by connecting applications and web services together using an easy-to-use point-and-click interface. Now, Claris Connect runs entirely in the cloud, and there's nothing for you to install to use it. Now, once you connect some apps or web services together, the integration runs seamlessly in the cloud. So there was some assumptions at the early stages where you needed to keep a browser window open, you needed to keep something open. Absolutely, positively not. Once you set up a flow, those flows are running up in the cloud, and you don't even have to have your computer turned on that you created them with. It's that cool. Needless to say, Claris Connect's reason to be is to make it easier to do the things that we normally do with APIs today. Now, for many of us, the concept of API programming is an insurmountable barrier to doing the things I'm going to demo tonight. Some people can't get past the sometimes confusing API documentation provided by third parties. Others can't get past the time and effort needed to create an API, much less multiple APIs if you want to integrate with more than one application or web service. It's safe to say that creating an API from scratch is an exercise that could take hours, days, weeks. It really depends, right? If you take nothing away from today's presentation, know that I'm going to create a handful of connections between apps and services that would typically require API programming in a fraction of the time it would take for me to connect just two of them together. And I'm going to do this without having to look at one page of API documentation or doing any coding whatsoever. No magic, no strings, no rabbit out of the hat, just Claris Connect. So when you sign into Claris Connect, you land on the home page, and your team name is displayed at the top left. Now, the home page displays all of your projects, which we're going to discuss in a minute. You can also use the options menu, pointed out with that little red arrow on the screen right now, to manage users and to install something called an on-premise agent. Now, managing users allows you to invite others to collaborate with you when you're using Claris Connect. And the on-premise agent is a special piece of software that allows you to connect to a FileMaker server and other supported data sources that are behind a firewall or in an otherwise secure location. We'll briefly talk about the on-premise agent a little bit later when we get to the part of the demo where I talk about connecting to your FileMaker data. Now, Claris Connect is built around the concept of flows, which are used to automate everyday business tasks and processes. For example, you can create a flow that adds a user's email to a MailChimp subscriber list when that user submits a form stack form. Flows are automations that use two or more components. Now, a component can either be a Claris Connect utility or a connector to a third-party application or web service. Now, to put it in FileMaker terms, in some ways, a flow is similar to a script in FileMaker Pro in that it automates a series of steps in order and can also contain conditional logic and error checking. Now, flows, as I said, are made up mostly with components. You can add components to your flows to allow you to connect to a third-party application or web service or to perform a specific task or action. Now, when you hear the word component, it's actually an umbrella term, and it's made up of things called utilities and connectors. Now, utilities are what you see on the screen right now. These are predefined components that perform a variety of data and file operations. Now, in my demos today, we're going to be touching on the approval utility and the dates utility and also the webhook utility. But you can see there are also utilities to perform things like calculations. You can schedule your flows to run. You can create variables, and so on and so on. Now, software that integrates workflows and shared data between apps or data sources are called connectors. Claris Connect ships with about 40-ish connectors today. And besides connectors to popular and industry-leading applications and web services, Claris Connect also ships with a connector to allow you to connect to your FileMaker data super easily. There are specific connectors for connecting to a FileMaker server, as well as a solution that is hosted in the cloud using FileMaker Cloud. And as I mentioned a few slides ago, we also ship with an on-premise connector that allows you to connect to either a FileMaker server or MySQL data source that resides in a secure location and isn't accessible on the internet. So the on-premise connector kind of acts as a gateway between this secure system and the outside world. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind if you're using any of the FileMaker connectors. The files have to be hosted. They have to be hosted on a version of server that's compatible, which currently is 18.0.3, or they can be hosted in the cloud. They also require the data API to be turned on whatever service that you are hosting them on. And you also need to have a third-party SSL certificate. That means the one that comes with FileMaker Server doesn't work. So you'll definitely need to have what a quote unquote real SSL certificate in order to be able to connect to your FileMaker data. All right, so when you're creating flows, the initial step in any flow is known or called a trigger. Now, a trigger in Claris Connect is basically an event which a flow will be waiting for or listening for. And each time that trigger event occurs, Claris Connect reacts and automatically performs the subsequent steps in that flow. So in this example, I'm checking Eventbrite for when a new attendee checks in. And when they do, I want my flow to kick off and perform whatever actions I specify. And those are called actions. Actions carry out an operation in a target app or apps. Usually things like create, update, perform a search, things like that. We'll kind of look at a couple of the connectors. Each one of them is different because each one of them can perform different things. Typically, however, an action requires a set of input fields and typically returns data that can be used in subsequent steps. That data is called step data, and we'll see that a little bit later when we start connecting our flows together. But step data is output data from a trigger or an action step. You will find that depending on the application or web service that you're connecting to, a lot of times the data that is returned from those applications are formatted in JSON. Now, I'm telling you right now, I am far from being a JSON expert. However, if you played around with JSON for any period of time, you know it's pretty human readable. So even if you don't know anything about JSON, or for that matter, anything about programming, you usually can look at some JSON arrays and elements and whatnot and key pairs and get a sense of what the JSON is talking about. But with that said, each application and web service will return data using sometimes some friendly names and sometimes some names you're like, what the heck does that mean? So this is where this step data really comes in handy. So what you can do, like for example, in the case of MailChimp, we'll use that as an example. We're going to be using MailChimp quite a bit tonight. You can create a subscriber in MailChimp, and then the information that you get back from MailChimp, they bring back a ton of stuff. But right next to it will be the sample data that you just entered into MailChimp. So you'll be able to see at a really quick glance that field XYZ, which you may not normally know is name field, has Joe Smith's name right next to it, and you'll be able to match it up really easily. If that doesn't make any sense at all, I assure you, once we start playing around with some of the flows that we're going to create, we're going to become very, very familiar with step data, and you guys will understand what I'm talking about. Now, you create and use projects to organize flows. Each project contains one or more connectors used by the flows. For example, you can create an Eventbrite project to contain all the flows that you use for Eventbrite, or you might have a project for sales related to all the sales flows, another one for marketing, you might have a DIGFM one. You're limited only by your imagination, right? You can create as many flows as you need, as many projects as you need to organize your flows. And you work with projects on the Claris Connect homepage. That's where they live. And you can create projects and use the projects option menu to edit, rename, and delete projects as well. You can also share projects with users. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this tonight unless you guys are dying to see it. It's pretty straightforward, but what this allows you to do is it allows you to collaborate with other people. So for example, maybe you have a customer who bought Claris Connect, but they need your help in creating flows. It's maybe just a little too hard for them to do, or maybe they're trying to integrate with something that we don't 100% have a connector for, or any other scenario in between. What they could do is they can invite you to help collaborate in their projects, in which case you can create the flows for them and then bow out once the flows are done. We also ship with a bunch of templates. Right now, we only have 4. We're going to be adding more as the product becomes more and more mature. Templates are pretty much what you think they are, and they are kind of like a helping hand to get you up and running, connecting to the various things that you see on the screen right now. So you can see it's a little bit limiting right now. You can create a connection between Eventbrite and MailChimp, Office 365 to MailChimp, Typeform to Slack, Typeform to Zendesk. As I said, we're going to be adding more and more to these as time goes on, but I just wanted to point out that they're there if you need to use them. They're kind of built with like a wizard in mind, so it walks you through step by step instead of you just having to create these from scratch. Okay, demos. So I'm going to tell you what the 4 demos are going to be, just to save me from having to go back and forth between Keynote and Claris Connect. So the first one we're going to do, I'm calling the simple flow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up Eventbrite with Slack, and when I when I make a change in Eventbrite, I want to send a message to everybody who's subscribed to a particular Slack channel that says event XYZ has been updated, or something along those lines. The next demo after that is probably the most involved one, and it's really not that involved, but it includes more steps than any of the other ones, because we're going to have 2 different things going on here. We're going to start with type flow, and I'm going to create a very simplistic, I already have it done, but I'm going to fill out a vacation request form in Typeform. I'm then going to have an email sent to a manager to approve or reject that vacation. And if the manager happens to approve the vacation, I'm going to add that vacation to an Office 365 calendar. As I said, this one's the most involved one, and I have not tried to do this with an API before, but there's no way you're going to be able to do it in the time that it takes for me to do it. And that includes me explaining things and going over things. So I'm going to guess we can do this one in about 15 minutes. After that, we're going to talk about what to do if you want to connect to an application that we don't have a connector for. And we've already gotten a list and a bunch of requests for a bunch of connectors. And I can assure you that we're working on a whole bunch right now. But at some point, you're going to roll up, hey, I want to connect to blah, 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 but Claris Connect doesn't have a connector for it. What can I do? Well, in that case, you can use something called a webhook. And I'm going to show you how to set that up. It's really easy. And then what I'm going to do is, full disclosure, however, let me back up a bit. I'm going to use a webhook with an application that we already support. So we're going to have to pretend that we don't. And that application that I'm going to use is MailChimp. And the reason why I'm using MailChimp, there's actually a couple reasons. One, it's free. Two, it is ridiculously easy to set up a webhook in MailChimp. There might be a C and a D, but those were the two main reasons. So when we get to that, I'm just going to remind you, even though we already have a MailChimp connector, we're going to pretend that we don't. And I'm going to use a webhook instead to allow myself to, when somebody subscribes, I'm going to send a tweet out in Twitter saying, Joe Smith has now subscribed to your mail list. And then finally, we're going to use MailChimp again, just because it's free and it's easy and it's there and we'll already have it set up. But I'm going to show you how easy it is to, oops, with a typo with 2 R's for create, how you can create a record in a FileMaker database once somebody is added to your MailChimp mailing list. Got a full plate. That sounds like a lot, but I bet we can get it done in about an hour. Let's start the clock. Okay, so I'm going to hide my presentation here for a while, and I'm going to show you Claris Connect. This is an example of the homepage. It is worth noting, if you haven't figured it out already, that Claris Connect requires that you log in using your FileMaker ID. So I've already done that. Save us a couple of steps here. I have 2 projects right now. I have the project with all the flows that we're going to do tonight. Just in case one of them doesn't work, I have examples of ones that are working. You'll notice that I just turned off 3 of them because I don't want them to run while we're working on our other ones. I just forgot to turn them off this afternoon. So that's one thing I'll point out right now, is you can turn on and off flows whenever you want. And while you're designing them, when you first start creating one, they're always off by default. So that's one thing to keep in mind also. Don't do what I did early on when I was using Claris Connect and create a flow and then scratch your head wondering why it doesn't work. It's because you didn't turn it on. So make sure you turn them on. So we have a couple projects here. So we're going to pretend that neither of these projects are there. So the very first thing that you need to do when you start using Claris Connect is you need to create a project. It's super easy. You just go over here, hover over this plus. You can either create a brand new one or you can create one from a template. I will point out before we go any further, if you wanted to start with a template, this is where you get to them right here. It's just a tab off of the home page. So I'm going to create a brand new one. We're going to call it My Projects. Now, because this project is empty, the very first thing that Claris Connect prompts me to do is create a flow. So I'll click on this button right here, and it asks me to name the flow. We're going to call this one Simple Flow. You can call it anything you want. I have found while I've been playing around with this that you need to have at least 4 characters. But once you get past that, you can call it whatever you want. And here you go. You are now displaying the utilities and the apps that you can use in your flows. Now, if you remember when I was going through all the terms, the very first step in any flow is a trigger. Now, as I go through here, you may notice that some of them are grayed out and some of them aren't. That means that the ones that are grayed out cannot be used as a trigger. Now, you'll find as you start playing around with Claris Connect Some utilities and apps can be used as a trigger. Some utilities and apps can be used as an action or in an action step, and some of them can be used both. We don't really have a comprehensive list of which ones can and can't, but what you can do is if you have any questions about any of them, whether they're grayed out or not, you can hover over them and you'll see a little circle with an eye pop up. And if you click on one of them, you'll get a list of what that particular utility or connector is capable of doing. So in the case of the lists utility here, I can see that it can't be used as a trigger, but it can be used as a whole bunch of other things here as an action. So we scroll down here, and I already forgot what we were going to do here. What are we? Oh, Eventbrite and Slack. That's right. We are going to connect Eventbrite and Slack together. And I accidentally, okay. So I'm going to scroll down here and select Eventbrite. And select Eventbrite. There we go. So when I do that, it shows me a list of all of the things that it can set up as a trigger. So if an order is refunded, if an attendee is updated, there's a whole bunch of things that I can do. Now, in my case, I want to check to see if somebody, if an event has been updated. So I'm going to check this box right here. And then I'm going to scroll down and click on continue. Now, in most cases, if not every case, especially when you're using one of the connectors, one of the third-party apps or web services connectors, the very first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to authenticate with that service, because Claris Connect needs to know how to connect to it, right? So you'll need to know the username and password or whatever credentials you'll need to provide for that particular service in order to continue here. So I need to click on Connect New Account. Now, I've probably done this a bajillion times, so it's not asking me for my username or password. It's somehow stored as a cookie or something in my browser, but it does ask me to provide permission. If I was doing this from total scratch, I would undoubtedly get an Eventbrite username and password login where I'd have to put in my username and password. So I'm going to click on Allow. Claris Connect thinks for a second or two, and I will get a success message here indicating that it has made the initial connection between that particular app, and I can continue. At this point, every connector is a little bit different, but usually what it's asking me in this case, although the messaging isn't super clear, is it's basically asking me, okay, I've established the connection between, in this case, Eventbrite, but what I would like you to do is I would like you to do something on the Eventbrite side so I can send over some sample data for you. So that's what it's asking me to do right now. So I'm going to open up a new window. Oops. And we're going to go to Eventbrite, but I've already bookmarked Eventbrite, or at least my page on Eventbrite. And we'll see we have one event here for today's meeting. And as you'll remember, I am setting up a trigger, so anytime any part of this gets updated, I want to be able to send a message to somebody in Slack. Now, I have found through all the playing around that I've been doing with Claris Connect that in the case of Eventbrite, all I need to do is pretend that I made an edit and save it. It doesn't need me to physically make a change. If I just click on this Save button down here, it should satisfy what Claris Connect is looking for me to do. Let's find out. Whoops, maybe it is the, oh, there it goes. Just took a second. So now you'll see, okay, I have brought over some sample data. Claris Connect is happy. I click on Save. Just like that, I have created the connection for Eventbrite. So that's step one. Step two is to define whatever actions that I wanted to do with Eventbrite. And while I'm thinking about it, let's kill this. Okay. Okay, so I need to create an action. So I'm going to click over here and I'll see there's a series of things that I can do here. And the first one is action. So I'll click on it and I get a screen very similar to what we just saw a few minutes ago. And it's asking me what I want to set up as an action. And as I said earlier, we're going to do Slack. So I'm going to click on that. It gives me a list of the things that I can do for an action in Slack. I want to post a message. So I'm going to leave it checked next to post message, and I'm going to click on continue. Much like I had to do with Eventbrite, I need to tell Claris Connect how to interact with Slack. So I'll click on connect new account. It's going to think for a second. I already have it set up. I'm going to say allow, and I've set it up, and we'll click on continue. Now here, unlike Eventbrite, I have a few more things that I need to fill out. And as I said, each connector is going to be a little bit different in terms of what it asks you for. Some of this stuff will be filled out for me automatically, and some of it I'm going to have to provide information on my own. So the very first one is asking me what channel I want to connect with. Now I already have a channel set up that I want to use. It's called sample Slack channel. So we're going to choose that. Oh, and if I had my camera on, you would see my cat jumping on my desk. Sorry about that. So now it's asking me what I want to put in the body of my Slack message, or what do I want to put in my Slack message. So I could put something in here that says, the event has been updated. And that would be okay, but I think we can do better than that. What we can do is we can personalize this message a little bit by actually bringing over the event name that actually got updated. Because if I have multiple events being updated, just getting a message that says the event has been updated, it's not going to be super useful because I'm not going to know which one it is, right? So this is where we can use that step data. And I feel like the step data is the secret sauce to Claris Connect because it allows you to do things very easily that look really hard. I kind of think of step data or the usage of step data along the same lines as using merge fields on your layout. So you might have a little bit of text, and then you might have a merge field that pulls data from your database, and then you might have some more text. So you might say, the following person, Joe Smith, passed the test. And the following person and passed the test would be literal text. And then you would use a merge field for the person's name. So how do we get to the step data? Well, over here we have a button. I'm calling this the step data button. I don't know if that's the official name of it, but for the next hour or so, we're going to call it the step data button. And what it does is it allows me to see the information payload that I got from Eventbrite when I did that initial change. So if I click on this, you're going to see a bunch of stuff here. And as I said, this one is a little better than most, but it has a lot of stuff that you may not necessarily know what it is, right? But you can see next to it is the data that came from the event that I had set up in Eventbrite. So if I scroll down here a little bit farther, at some point, if I didn't pass it already, I think I did, we have the name of my event. Here it is, DIGFM, right here at the top. So what I can do is I can use this information in the message that I'm going to post to Slack and personalize it a little bit more. So much like you would use merge fields in FileMaker, it's kind of the same thing. So I'm going to change this to something like the following event has been updated, and then maybe a colon and a space. And then I'm going to put this field right here, and I'm going to back it out. So even though it doesn't look like anything on the screen right now, in just a second, I'm going to show you how this works, and not only how it works, how fast it works too. Now, the rest of the stuff on this particular connector, I don't really need to be concerned about. I might put a space between Claris and Connect. This is the username that is used when posting to the Slack channel. So just putting a space between the two makes it a little more readable. I don't have to worry about the icon URL, or I'm certainly not sending an attachment. So I'm going to click on Save, and I'm done. I have just created my first flow between Eventbrite and Slack. Now, before I forget, and this is something that's critical to let your customers know also, and what I just did right now is a perfect example of it. You do not need to use FileMaker Pro for any of your flows if you don't want to. Claris Connect works completely independently from FileMaker Pro, FileMaker Server, FileMaker Go, whatever. You can certainly use it, and we'll see that in just a few minutes as well. But Claris Connect is its own product. So if somebody's like, well, Claris Connect sounds great, but I don't want to use FileMaker Pro, or I have no use or reason to use FileMaker Pro to connect from A to B, you can let them know that they don't need to have FileMaker database at all. All right. As I said before, don't make the same mistake that I usually do. You got to turn it on. Now, when you turn on the flow, it's going to bring up this message, just basically asking you if you want to keep a history of what happens with this for the next 30 days. You really don't have a choice, but it's very helpful, and we'll touch on it a little bit, what the history does in just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this. Now let's go back. Hopefully I left the window open to Eventbrite. Although before I do that, let's bring up Slack. And we'll go to my Slack channel. And I don't have anything in there right now. We'll make it a little bit smaller. And there we go. So let's go back to Eventbrite, and I'm going to click on Edit. And this time, just to make sure that we know that it worked, I'm going to actually make a change. So I'm going to actually put the date in this time. So March 12th, today's date. And we're going to click on Save. It's thinking for a second. And by the time I get over here, you'll see that it posted something in my Slack channel, and it has the updated date in there also. So just like that, I don't know how long that took me. I'm going to guess maybe 10 minutes. I created the equivalent of an API between Eventbrite and Slack. But there's so much more that you can do here. I don't think we're going to be using Slack anymore, so I'm going to close it out. And we're going to move on to the next project, which, just as a reminder, is going from type flow with an approval and then Office 365 calendar. This is by far the hardest one. I just created this one today, although I got it to work on my first try, so I was very proud of myself. But let's see what we need to do. So we're going to go back to my projects, and we're going to create a new flow. We're going to call this one the approval flow. And I'm going to go a little bit faster this time because we don't need this to talk about having to authenticate with the app or the utility, but I will slow down when we get to something newer. So we're going to go to Typeform. If you've never used Typeform before, it's really cool for making simple forms. As you'll see, I created a very simple form that captures a person's name and the date that they want to start their vacation and the date they want to end their vacation. But you can make some pretty elaborate things, and they have a free version. So if you haven't had a chance to play around with it, play around with it. Typeform only supports one kind of trigger when you submit a new form. So really easy to pick, much like before. I got to connect to it, so I'll go ahead and do that right now. I should already be authenticated, which I am. I'll go ahead and select accept. It says I'm successful. It asks what form I want to use. I only have one, my vacation request form. It's going to ask me to submit one. So I'm going to reuse this window over here. And I'm going to go to Typeform. and it's going to ask me to start the form. So it's going to ask me for my name. I'm going to say, today I'm Clark Kent. And I want to start my vacation on the 15th. And I want it to end on the 20th. I got to click submit. By the time I get back to Claris Connect, it should be happy. It is. It got some sample data from me. I'll click on save. And I'm done. So I've already established a connection between Claris Connect and Typeform. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to set up that approval. I want to be able to have an email sent to me when somebody fills out that form so I can either approve or reject their vacation request. So to do that, click on action. Now, instead of using one of these connectors down here, I'm going to use one of these utilities up here. And before I do that, I want to point out these guys up here. So as you start building flows and you start using connectors and other things, they end up showing up at the top of the screen. So if you're ever creating a flow and we'll say you want to use Eventbrite and you're down here and you're like, oh my God, what happened to Eventbrite? It's gone, I can't find it. It's probably because it's already been used in your project and it's up here at the top of the screen. So if you created a brand new project, Eventbrite would be where it should be down here in the alphabetical list. But once you use it in a project, it shoots up to the top. I think we did that just to make it easier if you're going to be using the same apps or utilities over and over and over again. All right, we got approval. Click on approval. There's only one action for it. Create a new approval. I'll go ahead and say that. But then it's going to ask me for some stuff. The first thing it's going to ask me for is a title. That's the title of the email. So I could just say vacation request. And a description. I would like some time off. Would like some time off. It also asks for the approver's email. In that case, and in this case, it's me. So I'm going to put my email address. Probably no secret how Claris email addresses are formatted. The approver's name, that's me. So I'll put that in there. The requester's name, we'll hold off on doing that for just a second. And then the rest of this stuff, or at least the attachment link, if I wanted to send an attachment, I could do that. But then one of the nice things about approvals is that you can set a due date. So I'm going to give myself 3 days to approve this. But much like when we were setting up that message to post to Slack, I bet we can do better than this particular format right here. Because if I got a whole bunch of vacation requests, I'm not going to know if they came from Eric or Joe or Bill or whoever, right? So I bet we can also format this much like we did with the message for Slack. So I'm going to put vacation request for, and let's see if we can find somebody's name in here. So I'm going to look at the Typeform data. Now, again, every one of these is going to be different. So Typeform displays the questions that you had and then the answers underneath them. So you'll see, what is my name? When does your vacation start? When does your vacation end? But none of my answers are there. They're all down here at the bottom in answers. So I can see, hey, there's the name that I typed in. So we're going to use name for there. So it'll now say vacation request for. And then I would like some time off between space, the start date, which is right here, and then another space, and then and end date. All right, and the rest of this stuff will be okay, although requester's name, I can also put in the requester's name here from the sample data that we get. Not super important in this particular step, but we might as well fill it in because we can. Get in there, Clark. Oops, put them in twice. We'll click save. And we're done with that part. Now, there's various ways that you can test things. I'm just going to turn this on just because it's the easiest way to go, but you'll find that some of these steps, not this particular one, have, well, we'll get to that in a second. Let me create a new request over here, and we'll see what happens. So Superman is going on vacation. Batman says, I want a piece of that also. So Bruce Wayne is going on vacation also. Criminals are gonna have a field day. 3/20/2020. All right. Now, this is the part that is sometimes super duper fast and sometimes takes a second. It's usually very fast, although this afternoon it wasn't behaving so well. But I have a smart folder here that's going to show all of the approvals that come in. So at some point, I should get an email in here that gets the approval from Bruce Wayne asking for some time off. So let's see if it catches it on this one. I'll do it one more time. Okay, we'll come back to this. I'm going to show you an alternate way of approving something, and that is this approvals tab right here. But before I click on that, let's look at the history for a second. If I click on history right now, this is a history of not only the changes that I've made in this particular flow, but when the flow has run. So I can see right now it's in a pending state. It's because it's waiting for somebody to approve something. So if I go to approvals now, I'll see there is a vacation request for Bruce Wayne. So this is another way of approving something. If for some reason, we'll try it one more time, the email doesn't decide to come in a timely manner, that is. It'll come in as soon as I approve it over here, I'm sure. So I'll say, okay, sounds great. This is the same information you would see in the email anyway, and I'm gonna go ahead and approve it. Now, of course, on my flow stops right now. So that approval just went into Never Never Land because I haven't built out my flow. But I wanna point out, if I go back to projects and I go back to that approval flow now, where it used to say pending, it now says success. It means I have completed, well, in this case, the 2 steps that I have in my flow, and the flow ran successfully. But we need to do some more stuff. For example, I want to go back to this one for a second. You can see these dates are formatted in a, I don't want to say non-conventional way. I'm going to say in a way that my brain doesn't immediately understand. My brain works with month/day/year. So it would be nice. This is the way that the data was formatted from Typeform. That is what it is, but we can format it so it's in a more personal format, so to speak. And you can do that using some of the utilities as well. So how do we go about doing that? Well, let me go back to projects here and we'll go back into our approval flow. What I want to do is when I get the information from Typeflow, but before I do the approval, I want to format a couple of those dates. So instead of adding the action at the end of my flow, I'm going to add it in the middle. So I'm going to add an action right here. And this time I'm going to use the date utility. Now the date utility allows you to add, subtract, figure out days in between, some pretty simple stuff. But the last option is it allows me to format a date, which sounds exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to click on that. And now it's going to ask me the date that I want to format and the format that I want the date in. So in the case of the date that I want to format, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to say start date, which is right here. And then I get to choose from a list of formats from here. This one right here looks pretty good. That looks more like my brain will understand that one. So I'll select that and I'll click save. And because I need to do the same thing for the end date, I can duplicate that step. So if you have a lot of things to format and they're all format, you want to format them a similar way, definitely use the duplicate step. It'll save you a lot of time. But I need to modify this one to not point to the start date. I need to point to the end date, which, nope, not that one, which is right here. Other than that, the format's the same. I'll click save. Now, if I had a whole bunch of these, pretty soon I'm gonna be like, I got a lot of format dates here. I don't know how to tell them apart. Well, some steps allow you to rename them. So I can rename this one instead of format date. I can save it as start date, and I can rename this one so it is end date. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, let's run this one more time and see if the dates are formatted the way that I want them to be. I'm going to jump comic book companies, and we're going to say the Hulk needs a vacation also. He always needs a vacation. 0315, they're all taking vacations at the same time. 0320, 2020. All right. Let's just see if that other approval ever came in. I don't know why it didn't. Shame on it. That's okay. We have a backup. We'll go to approvals. There's Bruce's approval. And look at our dates. Oh, our dates are not right. What did I do wrong? Did I not save the dates? Oh, I'll tell you what we didn't do right. And if you guys are on the phone, you might be able to tell me. Here's what I didn't do. Shame on me. Oops, we're in the wrong flow to begin with. We got to do this one. I modified this and I modified this, but I never told this step to use these two steps now. Rookie mistake. So what we need to do is back this up. And we'll say between. This time, instead of pulling the step data from the typeform form, I'm going to pull it from the date utility, which is here, and pull it from there. Now, I guarantee this is going to work. Let's do it one more time. Sorry about that, guys. We'll go Barry Allen. All right. Approvals, Barry Allen. All right, look at those dates. They look a lot nicer than they did just a few seconds ago. I'll go ahead and approve Barry's vacation. Good. You don't need to type anything in the comments if you don't want to, just so this doesn't clog up the works. I'm going to approve this one also. All right. So now we got the type form working, we got our dates working right, where the email's working right, but right now it's still going into Never Never Land. Everybody's getting their vacation approved, right? So now we need to put in a condition. If I approve somebody's email, I want to do certain stuff. So if I click here, instead of using an action step this time, I'm going to use an if-then. If-then, very, very similar to how you would use an if-then in a script in FileMaker. You need to test for a condition, and then you'll have a place where you can put things if you want or to execute when the condition is true, and things when the condition is false. You'll also notice I'm not going to focus on this during the demo. It also supports an and or statements as well. So you can get some pretty elaborate conditions set up here. So what I want to do is I want to select from the approval the status, because through trial and error, I know that's the field that I want to check for. So the status from the approval step includes, and we'll just make it insensitive, the word approved, clicked in the field, APPROVED. Okay, I click save. And now what I can do is I can click on here, and it has now a section for building out things when it's true and building out when the condition is false. For sake of time, I'm not going to worry about creating a false condition. It can just fall into never, never land. That's fine. In a real world, I probably would send an email back to the submitter saying, your vacation request has been denied. We're not going to worry about that. I'm just going to focus on what happens when I do approve it. So I'm going to click on this, and it's saying configure a new action. I'll click on that. Now, as I said, I want to add this vacation request to my Office 365 calendar. So I'm going to select Office 365. Office 365 has a ton of actions that you can do because it supports a bunch of different things, email, contacts, but we're going to do the calendar. So I'm going to do create event, and I'm going to scroll down here and click continue. Come on. It's going to ask me to connect to my 365 calendar. I will do that. Although I forgot my password, but that's okay. We will use one password. Everyone close their eyes. I believe it's this. All right, we're good. Click continue. And now it is asking me to format the way that I want it posted into my 365 calendar. Now there's a bunch of information here. Most of this I'm not gonna need, but this is important, like vacation request for space and the person's name. I can get the person's name from Typeform, right there. And now this is where things get a little bit tricky. I found that, so it needs to be formatted in this format, and it's JSON format. But luckily, if I just highlight this part, I can substitute some of the step data that I've gotten from some of the other steps in here. So I'm just going to do the start date here. Although, you know what? I'm not going to do that because I'm now remembering that it doesn't want it formatted that way. So let me get rid of this and this. Come on, get out of there. There we go. I'm going to pull the date from Typeform because I know that works for sure. Even though it's not the way that I want it formatted, 365 was very happy with it. So we're going to do that. Now, it also, I put it in the wrong place. It's okay, we'll get rid of it. It also wants to put, it's more of like a timestamp, but I don't have that type of information. So the date is perfectly fine. So we're gonna go, this is the end date. And I think I was doing US Pacific here. And we want the start date up here. Okay. The rest of this information, I believe, is not important. So although there's something in here that I haven't done yet, what is it? Because the button is not lit up yet. What have I forgotten to do? Oh, maybe this. What am I screwing up? The good thing is, if I can't get this button to light up, we are at the last step and I can just, okay, well, I've obviously forgotten something obvious here. I don't know what I did, but that's okay. We're going to missing quote character before the end date. Or maybe, nah, you're, I'll tell you what, it's okay because we're at the end here anyway. So I'm going to turn this one off, and luckily we have one that's working. We're going to go to this one and approval flow, and we're going to turn this one on. And we will go back to Typeform one last time. Although before we do that, let me open up another window and bring up my calendar. Notice I have nothing for the month of March. We'll tuck that down here for a second. We'll click here. Hal Jordan, 03/15/2020. 03/20/2020. All right. Go to approvals. Here's our buddy Hal. Sounds great. Click on approve. Find my window. Bring it up. And there is Hal's vacation put in my calendar. So I have used basically 3 apps: Typeform to email, email to a calendaring program. Took a little longer than I had anticipated, but way faster than it would have taken if I created 2 APIs to talk to these 3 applications. Very, very, very cool stuff. All right. The third thing we want to talk about is the situation where you connect, or you want to connect to an app that we don't support. In that case, you use something called a webhook. Now, there's an excellent chance that most web services and applications these days that you want to connect to support webhooks and callback URLs in one form or another. You may need to dig around in their documentation or their settings to find it. I will also point out that many free applications out there, especially some of the ones that we support, will allow you to do a lot of the demos that I'm talking, that we've been showing, or that I've been showing tonight, but the free version does not support API calls. So you've got to pay in order to use those. But chances are, if you're setting these up for a customer, they're paying for it anyway, in which case that's not an issue. But I just wanted to point out, I can't remember off the top of my head which one I was trying to get to work until I finally realized, oh, the free version doesn't support API calls, and no matter what I do, it's not going to work. All right, so we're going to connect an application that Claris Connect does not support out of the box, and we're going to connect it with Twitter. I'm gonna go to my projects, go here. I ran into this morning. Interesting. The only way I could get out of that is to quit out of the browser and start it back up again. We're gonna fire up Claris Connect again. And I'm not gonna touch that project right now because I know something's wrong with it already. So we're gonna go with my projects 2. And we're gonna create a new flow. We'll call this one Webhooks. Now, as I mentioned, just for ease of use, I am going to connect to MailChimp using a webhook, even though in most every situation, I'd want to use this connector right here, but we're gonna pretend it doesn't exist. So to do that, I'm gonna select webhook up here. You'll notice it is one of 2 utilities that can be used as a trigger. So if I click on this, it's saying incoming HTTP request. So I'll click continue. And right now it's asking me to give my webhook a name. As far as I know, you can call your webhook anything you want. I'm gonna call mine my webhook. Oops. And when I do that, it provides me with this very confusing looking URL. This URL is super important. This is called a callback URL. I'm gonna copy this into my clipboard because you need to provide this URL to the application that you're connecting to. When you do, when a supported action occurs, that app will send the information to this URL, in which case Claris Connect can pick it up and use sample the step data like we've already seen that you can use with supported apps, and you can pull information from that particular application. So this is super important. All right, so I have at least, oh, I don't, because I quit out of my browser. I'm gonna fire up MailChimp again, or I don't think I ever had it open, and I will log in. And I'm gonna go to my mailing list that I already have set up. Now, MailChimp makes it super easy. Sometimes, as I said, you gotta kind of dig through the settings to find out where you're supposed to configure a webhook, but MailChimp makes it super easy. If I go to settings here, they have a menu option for webhooks, hooray. So I'm gonna select that. Now, the reason why I have 2 webhooks here already is 2 reasons. One, there's one webhook for the demo that I did this afternoon to have just in case my demo didn't work. But the second webhook is created every time you connect to MailChimp using a connector, because believe it or not, behind the scenes, we use webhooks for a lot of our connectors. And the reasons why we do that is because it's ridiculously fast. Now, if you were on the call before 5:30, we were briefly talking about the competition. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the competition other than right now. So some of the competition, it takes minutes, like a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get a response from one application to another. You've seen when we've been doing all the things that we've been doing up to this point with Claris Connect, it's super duper fast. Like by the time I can open up the window to that application, that information is already there. Many of our competitors don't do that or don't support that level of speed without paying extra. So we're not going to use webhooks forever, but I'm just letting you know that our big claim to fame right now in terms of speed is like for a lot of our connectors, we use webhooks behind the scene. So that tangent aside, I need to create a new webhook because these 2 aren't going to work because they shouldn't be there in the first place if I was doing this from scratch. So I'm going to create a webhook. And right off the bat, it's asking me for that callback URL that I pasted or copied and pasted from Claris Connect. And then it's asking me when these certain actions happen, do I want to send information to the URL, the callback URL? I'm going to leave these all checked. In fact, I'm even going to check via the API just to make sure this all works. It's going to capture more than I want it to, but in our simple demo, all I'm going to do is add a subscriber to my mailing list. So I'm going to click save. And at least on the MailChimp side, that is all that I need to do. If I go back to Claris Connect, it now knows that the connection is complete. So I'm going to click save. And that's it. I'm done. So I've now connected to an application that, quote unquote, Claris Connect does not support. And now I'm going to add some information so we can post it to Twitter. But before I do that, just so I get some step data, I'm going to create a subscriber over here. So we will go to MailChimp. And we're going to add a new contact. MailChimp asks for a bunch of information, but in this case, really all you need to do is put in the email address and click these checkboxes down at the bottom. You got a message that it was successful, and now I'm ready to continue here. So we talked about Twitter. So I'm gonna go down here, select Twitter. I'm gonna tweet out that somebody has been added to the mailing list. I need to connect to my Twitter account. I need to authorize. So far, so good. And now I can create the tweet. So I can say something like, Joe Simpson's name's got to be in here somewhere. There he is. So Joe space Simpson has been added to the mailing list. And click save. Turn this guy on. Open up a new window. Go to Twitter. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a huge Twitter fan or Twitter user, so there could very well be some embarrassing things here. So we're gonna try to keep it as on the DL as much as possible. I know I should use Twitter more than I do, but I don't. Okay, so let's go bobjones@gmail.com. Bob, oops. Bob Johnson, it doesn't matter. We'll go Bob Jones. Good. Find my Twitter. And before, other than I forgot to put a space, before I could even get over to my Twitter account, I can see that Bob Jones has been added to the mailing list. So that's a real quick example of how you can connect to an app that Claris Connect may not necessarily support, and yet you can still use all the power and flexibility that you would be able to if you had a connector. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is show you how you can connect an app to some FileMaker data. So I'm going to use MailChimp again because it's the easiest thing to do. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to capture all of this information right here, and I'm going to add it to a record in a FileMaker database that is hosted on FileMaker Cloud. So in order to do that, as you might expect, I've got to come back over here, create a new flow. we'll call it the last flow of the night. Click on create. And this time we're actually going to use the MailChimp connector when a new subscriber comes in. Got to connect to the account. Now, the reason why I need to connect to the account this time is because I didn't really connect to it the last time because I used a webhook. So I'm going to log in, give it permission, click continue. Now, in this case, it's going to ask what list I want to use. I only have one on MailChimp. As you might expect, it's going to ask me to create some sample data. I will go ahead and do that. I'm running out of fake names. We'll just make up Steve Jones at gmail.com. Let's put my, although this time I want to put in a little bit more information. So we're going to put in the name, the address of the wedge, Patrick Henry Drive, Santa Clara, California, 95054. The phone number is 408-987-7000. And check these boxes, click on subscribe, jump back over here. It's all good. And we're done. Okay, so MailChimp's ready to go. And now we want to connect to my FileMaker solution. So we have special connectors for that. We have one for cloud and we have one for FileMaker server. I also mentioned that we have one for on-premise FileMaker server. That one's actually listed down here. So it's alphabetized as if on-premise was the beginning of it. Slightly confusing, but if you're looking for it and you didn't know where it was, there it is. We'll come back to this in a second and we'll talk about some of the do's and don'ts of using the on-premise connector. But I'm going to use the FileMaker Cloud connector here. Here are the things that I can do. This will pretty much satisfy what most people hopefully will want to do, especially this last one right here, and that is execute a script. So these are what I would consider simple things that you can do in your FileMaker solution, and this is kind of the grab all. If one of these 5 doesn't satisfy what you want, you can execute a script. So I'm just going to do something simple and create a record, because a lot of times that's all people want. I want to take records from this application and put them in FileMaker, or I want to take information from FileMaker and I want to put it in this application. I got to connect. Now, in the case of cloud, it makes it super easy because Claris Connect and FileMaker Cloud both use FileMaker ID. It fills in a lot of this information for me, or provides a pull down menu with just the information that I need to pick. So in case of organization, I only have one. In case of instance, I only have one. And I only have one file hosted, and that's this contacts file. So we'll select that and we'll sign in. Because we're using FileMaker ID and because my file in FileMaker Cloud already has my FileMaker ID in it, I'm automatically authenticated. I don't have to worry about username and passwords, and I'm good to go. Now, we probably should take a look at my FileMaker file just so we get a sense of what it is. It is right here. It's about as simple as it gets. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a third record from information from MailChimp. So I got 2 records right now. We'll tuck this down a little bit. We'll turn this on. Oh, wait. Before we do that, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So much like this is using the data API, I mentioned that at the top of the presentation, you need to have the data API turned on in cloud or FileMaker server in order for this to work. And much like using the data API, you have to specify the layout where the fields are that you want to use. It's probably good practice to maybe just create a layout that has the fields that you want on it and access that, but you don't have to. You'll notice that I have some extra fields down here that I'm not going to use. It doesn't hurt anything. It's quite okay. But I'm just going to use the step data to populate the information here. So bear with me for a second. This might be a good time to take a bio break while I fill this out. But I'll do it as quick as I can. Address. And city. And state. Oop. State. There. Postal code. And save. All right, the moment of truth. Let's go back to MailChimp. I already have FileMaker's database open up. I don't need to have it open up, but it's right there. Let's add our last contact of the night. bigfinish@gmail.com. Big. All right. Look at that, I got 3 records. And Big Finish is now in my database with no coding whatsoever, no API necessary. It worked great. Now, that is showing how to connect to your FileMaker data, but what do you need to do if you want to use FileMaker as a trigger? As you can see, it was pretty straightforward to use FileMaker data as an action. And I think most people would be able to do that with little to no trouble. Using FileMaker as a trigger is a little more involved, and I wasn't going to go over it during this presentation, but there's already some information about how to do it online, and we're going to be coming out with some information about it hopefully early next week. But it involves knowing a little bit about JSON and certainly how to write and format a data API call. So I'm not going to go through how to do it, but I'm going to show you a little bit of what's involved here. My flow 2000. I'm just going to pretend we're going to connect a server. The only trigger that you can use is a script trigger. Just so you know, this is a little misleading. It doesn't mean it has to be a script trigger. It just means it needs to be a script. The script could be a script trigger, but you could run it manually. You could run it from a button. It doesn't matter. So the wording on the screen right now have thrown off a lot of people. Are like, well, what if I don't want it to be a script trigger? Well, it doesn't have to be. It's just the trigger is the execution of the script, regardless of how the script is triggered, if that makes sense. So we'll click on continue, click on new account. Now it's gonna ask me to enter in a bunch of information here, but what I wanna do, you know what, I shouldn't have used this because I don't have one set up, but I can use my cloud one again. So we'll do that one instead. So let me back up here a bit. That was cloud trigger. We'll use my FileMaker cloud one, which is up here. All right. Okay, so you get a bunch of information here. I can boil this down for you in about 3 steps. Step number 1 is you need to create a script. Step number 2 is you need to create the first step needs to be a set variable step, and the variable name needs to be a global variable, and you need to call it JSON data. Then you'd use a create insert from URL step, and this is where you inject, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. In the variable, that's where you inject all of your JSON and data API calls in there. Then you create a insert from URL step, and you would put in this guy right here. And then it tells you to save it, and then you can execute it. You're also going to need this guy for the step also. You're going to need to specify it in step 5 when you're doing the insert from URL. This is FileMaker's callback URL or webhook. So again, this is all stuff that you would do or use if you were trying to do all this stuff using the data API. We're going to make this process a whole lot easier as the product matures. For version 1, it's a little hairy, I get it. And these steps could be written probably a little better than they are, but we're going to have some pretty good documentation going forward. And there's already been some great partners out there who have come up with some white papers and some videos that go over this in a lot more detail and in a lot more clarity. But I just wanted to give you a sense of what is involved in having FileMaker be used as a trigger. And then I didn't want to forget about our buddy, the on-premise connector. You can access that from up here. So there's a lot of useful information on this options menu right here. This is where you can invite people to collaborate with you. I'm not going to go over that, but it's very straightforward. What you do is you invite them in the FileMaker customer console. They don't act as a registered user or licensed user at all. They're just a regular plain user. And then they can come in and help you create flows. And then down here, you can get a sense of how much of your API requests and calls that you've made. I have an account that has 6 flows. You can already see I'm pushing the flows, my maximum flows right now. I'm at 5 of 6. So I'm going to have to delete a couple of them or turn them off. I can also upgrade my subscription if I want to. But where I'm going here is the on-premise agent. This is the little piece of software that you will install on a machine. It doesn't have to be the machine that FileMaker Server is running on. It just needs to be a machine that has access to the internet and has access to your FileMaker server. Because the big reason for this on-premise agent is there's going to be situations, government, high security areas where FileMaker server's locked down, right? It doesn't have access to the internet. And because it doesn't have access to the internet, it will not be able to use Claris Connect because it can't get outside the firewall or outside the building that it's in, right? So this on-premise agent acts as like a gateway between where your FileMaker data resides and the outside world. So you got to read the EULA, the terms of service here. And then you need to give your agent a name. Your agent can be called anything you want. I'm just going to call mine my agent. And then you have to choose whether you want to download the Mac or Windows version. I'm going to select Mac and click Next. Oops, I also spelled my agent wrong, but that doesn't matter. Then it's giving me an agent key. You need to copy this down because you're going to need it during the installation of the agent, and you're also going to need it when you are setting up the on-premise connector. I'm not going to go any further here. I mean, I could install the agent. It's very simple. It asks where it wants to be installed. By default, it goes into the library folder on the Mac, and it creates a folder called Connect. Inside of that folder, there'll be a configuration file that you'll need to configure. We have some steps in the online help of Claris Connect that tell you what you need to do. The help is actually pretty good. I'll show you that. It's down here, configuring the agent. So this is an example of what the configuration file will look like. You'll need to add So the configuration file has, when you create it, will have this information already filled out based on the name of your agent and your agent ID. There will be no reason to change this, so don't. And then you'll need to add this information yourself. Now, we also know that this is not super user-friendly either. Most people are not going to want to open up a terminal window and open up a text editor and find this configuration.yml file and edit this stuff. We get that. We're hoping in a hopefully a soon-to-be released update to Claris Connect that this will all be done in a web user interface, so you won't have to touch the configuration file at all. If I didn't mention already at the beginning of the presentation, although it should be pretty obvious, using Claris Connect, you do not have to install anything. So when I said that there's an update coming to Claris Connect, there's going to be tons of updates coming to Claris Connect, and you will get them all for free because they're all in the cloud. So as I said, you may wake up one day and there'll be 5 connectors that weren't there the day before, or this feature that I'm talking about right here where you have to manually edit the configuration file. You may wake up tomorrow and it'll be there in the web interface for you to do, so you won't have to get dirty playing around in the terminal. But once you get this all set up, then the on-premise agent works exactly the same as if you were connecting to FileMaker Server or FileMaker Cloud. So using it as an action, very straightforward. Using it as a trigger will require having some knowledge of the data API and JSON. Okay. I think that is all that I wanted to cover as far as that. We'll touch briefly on purchasing. There's 2 flavors of Claris Connect. There is the Essentials, nice. The Essentials version and the Standard version. You can see all of the information right here. The difference between the two is the number of flows you get initially and the number of API requests that you get initially. Also, in the case of Essentials, you're limited to using 3 connectors at once. So if you're going to be using more connectors, then you'll either need to buy some expansion packs, or maybe the standard version is the way for you to go. Now, if you've been on the community at all in the last couple of weeks, there's been some heated discussions about pricing. We've heard it, we get it. We're looking into ways that we can maybe make things a little less painful for you guys. So if you have any questions about the pricing tonight, I don't know that I'll be able to answer them other than what is shown on the website right now. But I feel like there's some changes coming. No promises, but I feel like there might be something down the road to make the pricing maybe a little bit more attractive for you guys. Other than that, I will open it up to questions. Let's see if we have any. Nobody mentioned any in the chat after my typing faux pas with the JSON. Is it possible to export import flows? Fantastic question. Comes up all the time. I should have mentioned that during my presentation. There is no question there's a need to be able to do that. Today, the answer is no. But I know that's something that we're heavily looking into. So hopefully somewhere down the road, you're going to wake up one day and there's going to be an import or an export button sitting right there on the home page or in one of your projects, and you'll be good to go. Is it possible to create new templates and contribute them to the community? Also a fantastic question. Our plans somewhere down the road, will not only allow you to create your own templates, but will also allow you to create your own connectors as well. Those aren't ready for prime time yet, and I believe those have been mentioned in a roadmap webinar at some point down the road. But as it stands right now, neither one of those is available, but those are two things that we're definitely looking into. In the step data button, what is the behavior of search? Ooh, it's going too fast here. Only for JSON keys, or is it searching also for values? You know what? I don't know the answer to that. Let's find out. I may have to run one of these to get some step data, but let's see what happens. If I go here, no, if I go here, let me do a search for Jordan. Hey, look at that. So it definitely searches the step data, and I assume maybe that's it. Yes, so it does not appear to search the JSON elements. It just searches your step data. Okay, we answered that. Do scripts take parameters and variables? Yes, they do. So I do not, or I am not aware of any limitations that aren't already limitations of the data API when it comes to scripts. So anything that you can do with the data API, you can also do with Claris Connect. Can you duplicate projects? No, you can only rename them and delete them. Let me just double check that though. Yep. So edit is the equivalent of me just clicking on the project to open it up. Rename does exactly what you think, and delete, be very careful, because not only will that delete your project, it will also delete all of the flows that are in your project. So it will not really give you a warning other than this one right here. So yeah, can't duplicate projects. Does approval support different language aside from English? So right now, Claris Connect is English only, but that's not to say that it doesn't support other languages. I will have to look into that question, Robert. I don't know to what degree the approvals will work. Let me see. Approvals, support, I'm writing this down. Support different languages. And yes, I will make a note of the duplicate projects. First payload for MailChimp, you made sure to fill in more data. Is Connect blind to other data points if it is not sent the first payload it receives in the original handshake? I will show you what it does. Basically, you just will not get any information at all. So some of our competitors put in some dummy data, but in our case, I'll show you what we do. I'll just create a new project here. New project. That's good enough. Who cares if I spelled it wrong? My flow. MailChimp is my go-to, my buddy. I will create account, log in, allow, continue, list. So how am I going to get past this? I know I can. I think what I need to do is just put something in here for right now. Basically what it does is it will just show you the JSON with no data, and depending on what application that is sending it to you, it may make total sense, or if they use a bunch of crazy JSON fields or key pairs, it may make no sense at all. So, but you definitely can do it without it. And then if you get good at it, you certainly don't need to use the step data if you don't want to. It just makes it easier to use. Any other, can the agent interface with something else other than Claris Connect? So the agent, the on-premise agent that we're talking about can connect to 2 different data sources, although it's 2 different agents. Let me bring Claris Connect back again. We have one for FileMaker server, and we also have one for wait, what am I doing? I can't. Actually, you know what? I can now show you what the, or we have one for MySQL. Sorry, I got sidetracked. So we have an on-premise agent for FileMaker server if it's behind a firewall or secure, or if you want to connect to a MySQL server in the same situation, you can do that as well. So here's a situation here. I'm going to use this. Create a new, oh wait, this is a bad example because I don't have an API key. We'll just use approval. So here is my step data. You'll see it really shows nothing, but different apps show different things, but MailChimp basically provides no information. Can you give some details about the Claris Connect Partner Program? So this is something we just started. In order for you to be eligible for it, you need to do a few things. You need to watch a couple of webinars, and then you need to send in a very short video of yourself demoing a very simple flow that we provide you the steps with. If you do all 3 of those things and you get the thumbs up from us, you are considered a Claris Connect partner. We don't really have much more details than that, like what does that give you other than to say that you're a Claris Connect partner. As the program matures, I'm sure there'll be more and more benefits, but as of right now, that's what the Claris Connect Partner Program is all about. Anything, oh, anything else? Did I miss Martin's question? Where is it? Is there any internal discussion about having a free? Of course there is. We're trying to figure out a way to make it easier for you guys. I don't have any details about that, but we've also heard loud and clear you guys wanting that as well. We know it would be super useful. So stay tuned. We'll probably have more information about that, but as of right now, we don't, other than I can tell you it's not a absolute no. It's a kind of a work in progress. We're trying to figure out the best way to do it. So stay tuned. Hopefully that was the question you were talking about. Let me see if I missed any other ones now that I'm up here. All right, looks like I got all of them. Okay.
I stepped out for a little bit. I was wondering, did you guys did you cover anything with Gmail or Google Calendar or anything that's coming from Google?
So we have some Google connectors already. If you were in the ETS or the Claris Connect beta program, you might have seen some other Google connectors in there that aren't there right now. Google Calendar being one of them. I forget, there's like a handful of them that didn't make the March 3rd launch. They needed a little more time in the oven, but those are forthcoming and will show up in Claris Connect whenever they're ready. It's too bad because I was, for those of you who didn't join the call at the beginning, I was using Google Calendar for a lot of my demos before Claris Connect shipped. And then when it wasn't in there, I had to backpedal a little bit and use Office 365's calendar because we did have a connector for that, but it is coming. And I think Google Mail is also one of them as well. There's a handful of them, so stay tuned. Is there a Salesforce connector? Good question. I kind of went over the different connectors really fast here, but maybe if I scroll a little bit, you guys can get a better sense of what we have. There is a Salesforce connector, or there was a Salesforce connector. Make sure there still is. All right, so Salesforce is also one of the ones that needed a little more baking time. So stay tuned for that. There will be more Google ones. And as I said, there is going to be more, our goal is to add connectors as fast as we can. So as I said, it's not a total exaggeration that you could wake up tomorrow and there could be 5 new connectors that weren't in this presentation tonight. As much as we can provide a roadmap, I think we will. We do have a knowledge base article that lists all of the connectors that are available in the product and when they were introduced to the product. Right now, it's just a list of all of the initial ones. But if you do a search in the knowledge base for Claris Connect connectors, you'll find that knowledge base article. So that might be a good one to bookmark and reference as time goes on, because we're going to be adding to it when new connectors are available, as well as making notes on that article if we made any changes or enhancements to a connector also. If we fixed a bug, if we added some new triggers, if we added some new actions, you'll find all that information in that knowledge base article as well. Anything else? Well, if there aren't any more questions, we will call it a night. Hopefully you guys are excited about Claris Connect. Hopefully I didn't go too fast, which was the concern of some of the people at the beginning of the call. Hopefully you got something out of this and you're like, wow, I could really use this in my solutions. I could really use this in my everyday life. If you have any questions at all post presentation, feel free to send me an email. If you've been around the FileMaker world or the Claris world for any period of time, you know how our email addresses are formatted. I won't make it a huge secret. My email address is my first name _ character, last name. My last name is R-O, M as in Mary, I, G as in George, at either FileMaker.com or Claris.com. They both still work. At some point, the FileMaker one won't, but you can definitely send it to the Claris one and I'll get it. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. I do have a couple of homework items to follow up on. The duplicate, well, no, that's just a feature request. I'll do that, but the localization for the approval, I'll see if I can get some information about that. Or as Eric is putting in the chat, you can discuss the presentation on the community. In any event, thank you for participating in the first ever 100% virtual DIGFM Santa Clara meeting. I think it went really well. My AirPods worked the entire time, so thumbs up to Apple for at least 2 hours of talk time. And Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your Friday. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll talk to you guys soon.